Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Scott McQueenie, and I'm going to be your Scotterator for today's presentation, which is Connectwise Automate Tips and Tricks. My man running the show today is going to be David Allen. No, he's not David Allen Co. He's not Co. If you have any questions during the presentation, if something happens with the audio or the video, please don't hesitate to reach out to me in the questions panel, and we'll see if we can get that taken care of for you. Without any further ado, I turn it over to my man, Notco.
Thank you very much, Scotty. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Connectwise Automate Tips and Tricks. As Scotty has mentioned, when it wants to go, I am David Allen Notco. I'm a senior software training consultant on the education team. I started with Connectwise back in 2014 as overnight support consultant for our Australian and European partners. I did help pilot the Automate Premium Support Program when that first started several years ago, and joined the education team as a consultant in 2018. It's also a fun fact, even though I am not David Allen Co., I actually happen to share my birthday with David Allen Co. So let's get started with today's agenda. We're going to start out with, this will be some general tips and tricks you can use to help better automate and move a little faster in your Automate system. Some of these things you may already know, some of these things may be new. But first we will start with copy users with configs. This is going to be setting up a user, maybe say a baseline or a template user, and applying certain user classes or permissions to that user and having the ability to copy that. So if we acquire new technicians for our system and we have to set up maybe a team of 20 people, for example, we don't need to go in and set up each and every individual user. We can have that ability to copy and make life a little easier for everybody. After that, we're looking at copying client permissions, and this has to do with the user class permissions that are assigned to each client in Automate. We'll also look at establishing a baseline setup there, so you can go in and then copy that baseline to your other clients that are not set up yet. Then create a script from commands. Doing this is actually very easy. You don't have to really know much about scripting to be able to have this capability to do this. I know for anyone that is new to Automate, scripting can appear to be very overwhelming. It was for myself years ago when I first started. I didn't know much about it. It looked very overwhelming, but once I learned this trick, it actually got me to start developing my own kinds of scripts and getting into scripting and getting to know the scripting engine a little bit more. Then we'll set extra data fields defaults. This is going to be where we will go into our dashboard and Automate and set those defaults for our agents or for our locations or for our clients, where we can apply certain applications or settings to those agent machines so we can have them ready to go pretty much right out of the box. And what kind of ties into that is with Automate agent configuration. This is where we will talk a little bit about onboarding and what we can add to that process when the onboarding runs for an agent. Copy users with configs. So there's a lot of settings that are within a user profile. You of course have username, password, and email, but you also have things like user classes and all those checkboxes on the right of the user class where you have to set up those permissions for that user. And if you have a lot of users to set up, getting a lot of those configured could be kind of labor intensive. If, like I said earlier, you have 20 users to set up in your system and you're going in and setting up each individual user account, then that's going to take some time. That's going to be pretty time consuming. So you can see with our Automate user here, we have just a generic user set up in this example. This one is an integrator as well. So if this is going to go along the lines of maybe you want to set up a integrator template account, for example, And that way, when you have any type of integration with Automate that requires a user to be able to sign into Automate, then you can actually use this as an integrator account template as well. But we're setting this up as just a template for our technicians. So with this user, if we go to the permissions tab, we can see in our user classes, we have our help desk users, knock, and patching admin. What we also have at the bottom is some settings as well for our command level limit. Since this is going to be a knock user working the help desk and doing patching, I'm going to put them at the highest command level limit, and the auditing level is set to everything. And we've of course enabled desktop client access. This is going to allow them to be able to sign into the desktop control center. Now, if this was a user with a little bit less permissions, or maybe they were just a knock user class, and depending on how your knock would be set up, if they don't need access to the desktop client, you can uncheck that box and they won't be able to log in, but they can still use the web control center to then work on your machines. After that, we have our groups and clients, and this particular user is set up for all agents and all clients. So they will be able to access all of the systems or see all the systems within Automate. And finally is the user avatar. In this example, this user doesn't have one selected. So this is something that even if set up, you can put an image in there or whatever you want for your user. It's for the user icon in the upper right corner. So to get started with copying that user in our control center, we're going to go to the system module and then go over to users and contacts and go to our user screen. When we get to our user screen, we're going to see maybe some various folders that have our users listed there, and we have our users listed down here on the right. We can right click on the user that we would like to copy, but we're going to select duplicate because we don't have that command called copy. When we select duplicate, we're going to get the add new user window. This is similar to when you would just simply click add new user or the add button to add a new user in your Automate system. However, there's going to be some settings that did carry over since we did select duplicate on the user. You can see the required information is here in this pinkish color. This is for the username and password, of course, and an email address. And the integrator box is checked here as well. Now, what the integrator box is for is that if you do have your product integration, if a product or an application is logging into Automate, and if Automate is going to attempt two-factor authentication, that product, although it may be emailed, it's not going to necessarily be able to come back and put in that two-factor code. So if we do have a user set up where you do have the integrator checked, but you want to make sure they are going to use some type of two-factor, you want to uncheck this box. When you do that, you also want to make sure that you put an actual working email address in there as well, because if you don't have them set up with any other type of two-factor, such as Duo, or if they're not signing in through SSO or anything like that, then you want to be sure that the email address in there is working, so they will get that two-factor authentication via email. Aside from that, on the next screen, we really don't have to set up anything here. We can see that the help desk users, the user classes that was in the Automate user is still there, and all the same selections are there as well. Since we've configured that ahead of time with our template user, so to speak, we can see that we don't have to do anything really here. The work has been done for us. It's already made things a little easier because now I can just click through. I can double check the information, but I don't have to change or add anything. I can if I want. Note that the auditing level is still set to everything as well, and the enable desktop client access is set. If you are to go in and add a user, I know before, quite a while ago, when we had a first iteration of this webinar, that you would have to come in. If you were creating just a straight new user, the auditing level was not set to everything. This is now changed, and by default, if you just add a new user, whether you're duplicating or not, if you go to the permissions tab and look at the auditing level, it is actually already set to everything, so you don't need to make a change there. Next is our groups and clients. Just as before, we have the all agents and all clients listed in there. And then finally is the user avatar. This is a setting that will not carry over. So this is something that can be unique to each and every user. If they have their own avatar, they can go and set that up later, or you can set up an image for them if you have, say, a generic company image. Now, some of you may be thinking from the groups and clients tab, Nako, we talked about the group membership. How come you didn't mention primary clients? What's the deal with that? Well, I'm going to talk about primary clients now. Primary clients is the list that the user can take advantage of when they only want to see certain clients listed in Automate. If you are a larger MSP or TSP and you want to narrow down the list for those particular users, if you still want them to have access to everything, but maybe you have 5 clients that you mainly want them to focus on, you can come here to their primary clients section, and I'm going to select 2 of the clients we have here on the right and move them to the list on the left. Now what that's going to do is that's going to allow that user to actually focus on the client list on their system. So if you are a larger company and you have, say you have 1,000 clients in there, and you want to limit them to at least see, or you want to give them the ability to limit their view to maybe 20 of them, if they're assigned to 20 different ones. When they sign into the control center, at first, they're going to see all the clients listed here. In order to see their primary clients, all they really have to do is right-click on the clients itself, and then select Limit to Primary. From those 2 clients I selected earlier, it's now going to limit the list in the navigation menu to only those 2 clients I had listed. You can still see here on the right, I'm still on clients, but I have all the machines listed here from all my clients. So we have our Edgy Automate, we have our Acme client, we have Pizza Pete's and more Edgy Automate. They're still listed here. They can click the individual client to narrow it down to the particular client list. So even if they have primary client showing, they're still going to see the entire list of client machines there, but they can click each individual client and get a more narrowed down list to what they want to show. Next is copying client permissions. So we've given the ability now for the user to make things easier with creating new users, with copying or duplicating the user. And you can just put in the username and password and email and pretty much get them set up ready to go. But what about the client permissions? These are going to be the user class permissions that are listed for your clients. So we're in our control center here, and when I double click the Edgy Automate client, this is the screen I'm presented with. I start out with the general tab. I'm going to go ahead and go over to permissions. And these are the client permissions that are set for this client. If I take a look in particular at help desk users, we can see the permissions listed for the help desk users. They can read locations, look at projects, product keys, and so forth there. Under the default computer permissions, and this would be when they open the computer management screen, they have several settings here: access the command prompt, access history, view commands, send commands, which those 2 are very important, especially for later on when we're going to create scripts from commands, allow peer-to-peer tunnel, and more. So to copy those client permissions, there is 4 steps to this process. The first 2 steps involve establishing a baseline for your client user class permissions. So if you already have a client in mind in your system where you have that baseline established and you're thinking, man, I wish the rest of my clients were set up this way so it can make life a little easier for me, then you can use that client and you don't have to actually do the first 2 steps in this process. You could do steps 3 and 4. If you don't have that baseline yet, then you want to do all 4 steps. So the first step would be to, if you don't have that baseline set up and your permissions are not set up the way you want it, you want to pick your client and clear those client permissions on that clear those existing permissions on that client. So I'll right click on our Edgy Automate client, for example, and go to permissions and then select clear permissions. You do get a confirmation prompt that comes up and says clear permissions for this client. So I would click clear. And now if I double click to open the Edgy Automate client and go to the permissions tab, you can see everything is cleared out. I don't have any user classes. I don't have anything selected over here. It's ready to go, blank slate. So to add a user class back in, it's as easy as doing a right click. So we're going to set permissions on the client that we've chosen. I'm going to right click in our user classes window, and I'll select the user classes that I want to add. After selecting those user classes, I can come back over here and I can decide what permissions that user class will have for this client. Now, if this is going to be a one-off, again, you're not going to be using this as a baseline, but since we are setting up a baseline, I figured that we can have our accounting, help desk users, LT admin, we'll have different sets of permissions for our clients, and I want to blanket this across my whole system. So now with that baseline established, I'm going to go back to the control center, and I'm going to clear permissions for all the other clients. I would do this by right-clicking again on the Edgy Automate client, selecting permissions, and going to clear all permissions. Now, when this confirmation comes up, it's actually going to say clear permissions for all clients, but this one. So exactly as it says, it will clear everything out and make everybody a blank slate at that point. When I hit clear, I can now right-click on that same client again, and I'm going to apply those permissions to all those clients. Right-click on the Edgy Automate, go to permissions, and click copy permissions. Now, this isn't going to copy per se like you think of it going into the clipboard. It's going to come up and confirm to copy the permissions to all clients without permissions. So any other clients that are a blank slate in your Automate system, they're going to get those same permissions, in this case from Edgy Automate, copied over to them. So I know those user classes are going to be set up now. Now, between steps 3 and 4, if I went to a different client and I wanted them to be an outlier or one-off, and I wanted them to have their own kinds of permissions, then I could go into that client, quickly set up a user class with certain permissions, and then when I go to copy all clients, copy all permissions, then it's going to copy the permissions to all those clients except that one. So it will not overwrite if you do have anything established on any of your clients. So now we'll look at creating a script from commands. As I mentioned before, creating a script from commands is actually a very easy process to run through. You can do this without having to know much about scripting. So it is a very easy way, or I would say a comfortable way to start getting into scripting if you want to. If this is something that you wanted to learn and maybe you've kind of avoided, like, yeah, I know my scripts do things. I get scripts from the Solution Center and they do great things, but I don't really know much about scripting, then this is kind of a good introduction to it to get you started with scripting, to kind of see how certain things are made. And then you can tear the steps apart and break it down and work with it. So we can open any of our agents from the computer management screen, and say I'm looking at this particular agent, maybe because they're getting low on space. I know the tile is not really indicating that, but for example, we could say that we're going to run a disk cleanup command on this agent here. So I'd go to the begin button, go to commands and file, and run disk cleanup. and then I could wait for that command to complete and automate. Once that command is completed, I can go back to the begin button, go to user desktop this time under commands, and click send message. And I'm just going to send a message to the client, letting them know, hey, your disk has been cleaned. Let us know if you have any issues or anything like that. Put whatever you want in the message. Not necessarily the process you need to do for a disk cleanup, but this is just running some commands on here. And you're thinking now, if you're running through a process like this on an agent and you're having to repeat these steps quite often, you may start to think, is there a way that I can save time on this? Is there a way that I can make my life easier so I'm not repeating myself every day on this task? This one is a simple 2-step task. You could have something that's 5 or 10 steps where you're running 5 to 10 different commands on the system. Then you can actually come in here and make life a little easier and make this into a script. So after running those commands in the system, I can right click on our automation icon up here at the top, and I'm going to select commands from the list. You can see the 2 commands I have run here. I already have them selected. You can do a shift click or a control click to select other commands as well. So if I wanted to throw in scanning system info, for example, I could control click and add that in there. I could throw a wake on LAN in there before I do the disk cleanup, so I could select one of those and run that if I wanted to. Or you can just simply select one command if you want to do that. But with these 2 selected, I'm going to right click on it now, and I'll select create script. And what that will do is that will bring up an auto-created script. In this case, it's calling an auto-created script for cleanup disk. And this opens straight into the script editor. This is where now I can actually look at my steps and see what they're doing. I can double click into them and see how those steps are actually constructed. So as I mentioned before, is that this can kind of be a good introduction if you want to start getting your feet wet with scripting. You can get an idea of how the script is put together, and you can open each step and see how each step is constructed and maybe get yourself a little more comfortable with scripting. So I can see that this is going to run the disk cleanup and then actually send a message to the user like I did before. So I will give this script a more meaningful name and a little bit better description. So if my bro Scotty comes in on the system and takes a look at this script and he sees, oh, Notco made this script, what does this do? He can look at the name and the description and actually see what this script is doing. Now, when I click save on that script, I'll be brought back to the computer management screen, back to the control center. And you're thinking, that's great, but I just made this script. I don't really know much about scripting. Where the heck did this thing go? Where can I see it? Glad you asked. We can go back to the control center and we'll go to the automation module and then view scripts. From there, we're presented with the script screen itself. Here on just the scripts parent folder here, you can see all of our scripts we have listed. In this case, there's 494 in just that scripts folder alone. That's a lot of scripts. And you're thinking, man, I gotta pick through all that now to figure out where it is. Well, we have a nice handy search feature here that I can start to type in the name disk cleanup. And would you look at that? The script is right there in the system from where I created it earlier. So disk cleanup with user message, that's what I named it before. And the nice thing is that it actually tells me what folder it's in. How useful is that? It lets me know that the script has gone into the actions folder. So now when I click into that folder, there it is right there. And there's all of our other auto-created scripts. This is going to be the default location when you create scripts from commands. They're going to get dropped into this actions folder. So even if you go ahead and create the script from the command and you don't name it anything, it's usually going to name it auto-created script and then maybe part of the first step as the name. So you can see there's one that says set master PC, update plugins, wake on LAN. These are all simple scripts that have been created from the command screen on the computer management screen. So with that, now we're going to look at setting the extra data fields defaults. To start that process from the control center, we're going to go to our system and configuration and dashboard. And when the dashboard opens up, we're going to be looking at the config tab and then additional field defaults, excuse me. The additional field defaults are going to be what's applied out of the box to, say, any new client that I set up in Automate or any new location under said clients for Automate. In this example, we have the client locations or any new locations I'm going to create. They're going to get assigned under locations the AV solution, my default AV solution. Now what that does out of the box is that's going to take and make sure that I'm going to apply my default AV solution to my clients in my Automate system. So if I have a particular AV that I like to use and I don't want to use the stock one that's installed in their systems or maybe their old system, I can have a script go in and look at this checkbox here and say, okay, they're going to get the default. So if I go to a newly created location, such as Edu Automate under the main location, and we're going to see that the default AV solution is checked here. Now, if I create a location, but I haven't installed any agents yet, and if this is a brand new location, if I go into that location first with no agents in there and I uncheck this box, then those agents will not receive my default AV solution. Those agents will be in there, but the extra data fields defaults will not come in and overwrite the setting. It's only going to do it on a blank setting. And because that was already checked and Automate or the system is going to see that I have unchecked that box, it doesn't make it go back to a not set, it's just setting it to a 0. Basically, the setting is either going to be 1 or 0. And when it's a first initially created, that's when it will have the not set status on it. And then Automate will set that to 1 according to my extra data fields defaults. So when I go and uncheck it, now it's setting it to a 0. When Automate checks the system later on, it will not overwrite this. But you may be thinking, well, that's great, Nako, it's just a checkbox. How is Automate or how are my agents going to know to get that AV solution or that default AV solution? All I'm doing is checking a box. I'm not really telling it to do anything. Well, this is where more scripting would get involved in the setup. So looking at some script steps here, we can see our first script step is going to get our extra data field value. And when we do extra data get value, we are presented with a drop-down list here that then we can select what extra data field we're going to get. In this case, it's going to be default AV solution, and it's a -2 because it's under the location tab. After that, we're going to make sure to put in the %location ID % because all of our locations for all of our clients are going to have unique identifiers to them. So we want to make sure to have that in there. So that variable will be able to put in, say, 25 or 12, depending on what the location ID is. And then the variable we're setting is going to be the variable we're getting is the default AV solution. And this is going to be a user variable, so it's specified with the @ symbols. The next step I have is it's actually checking that variable to see if it is equal to 1 or if that box is checked or not. So this step is seeing like, okay, it's checking the default AV solution. It's seeing if it equals 1 or if the box is checked. And if it does equal 1, it's going to jump to the label in my script, check current AV installed. And then there it can take additional steps and say, okay, what kind of AV is installed? Does it match my AV program? Oh, it does match my AV program. Great. I'm going to go ahead and leave this alone. I don't need to mess with it. If it doesn't match the AV program, all right, now I can have more automation in place on that script to maybe open a ticket so I can have a technician go in and install my AV, or I can have it maybe send an email out to the user. Hey, we've noticed you're using a different AV than what we had installed in your system. Can we set up a time to talk and discuss what's going on with your client, with your system? Or you can have it set up to automatically remove whatever AV may be found in there and install your own AV program so you can get your client set up and ready to go. Now we have our Automate Agent configuration. And you may be thinking, well, we already kind of went over that with the extra data fields defaults. And yes, we did, but with our agent onboarding, there's actually a little bit more configuration there that can happen. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with our onboarding script and how that works in Automate and what the onboarding does or process does when it runs on the system. But let's take a little bit closer look at that. So from our control center, we're back in scripts again, and we're going to go under system automation and the onboarding folder there, and we're going to look at the onboarding script itself. Now the onboarding script itself is actually a script that runs a series of scripts. It's going to go in and decide what scripts to run based on your onboarding setup. And you can see I have one highlighted here at step 11 that is the system automation onboarding install software install partner, or initial software install partner, excuse me. And what that's going to do is that's going to install software that I pick on my systems that I want to be maybe a default thing or a default loaded thing on the system when the client first starts. Back in that same folder, there is our initial software install partner script. If I double click to open that, this is the script. If we go back to our onboarding script, this is the script that's being called by step 11. And then when it hits step 11 in that onboarding script, it's going to come in here and see, oh, we're going to run this script now to install Adobe Flash Player 10. So maybe I have my system set where I don't want to receive a bunch of tickets or anything for having a missing PDF reader on my system. I know in the past, in my own experience, when I've set someone up before and I had Windows installed, I had their required applications installed, I overlooked installing a PDF reader on the system, and they were either opening PDFs in the browser or they just weren't opening them at all. And I'm getting calls from them, hey, where's my Adobe? I want to read PDFs. I want to look at things on here. Why don't we have Adobe on here? I could have had my onboarding script set up to actually call the initial software install partner script to actually go ahead and have that install Adobe. I know this says Flash Player in this example, but I could have it set up to install Adobe Reader on my systems as well. So that way I'm not getting a bunch of tickets. I'm not getting a bunch of feedback from my client saying, well, why isn't this installed on here? What's going on? Why am I having to look for this? Or how come I'm having to use Edge to open my PDFs? I don't want to use Edge. So this will allow me to get my applications that I want onto the system pretty much right out of the box. Agent gets installed. I have onboarding checked on the client. It's going to run the onboarding script. That script is then in turn going to run scripts that I have specified in there. In this case, the initial software install partner, that's going to call a script to then call another script to install my application. So this can allow me to automate that agent configuration right out of the box. I don't have to then go and manually configure every agent, or if I've gotten a large client with, say, maybe to start out 100 agents in their system, I don't have to go to 100 different machines and install Adobe. I can do that in pretty much one step when they get onboarded. All right, and with that, we have some of our key takeaways from today's lesson. And you know, when I talked about the first two things, we had the word copy in there, and it dawned on me at the end of this is that I didn't say one of our Automate 5 best practices, which is, of course, don't get sloppy, make a copy. When you copy user configs and you copy the client permissions, you're getting that template set up to set up future users, to set up future clients. So you can make life easy for yourself. You're going to have those things set to a standard for your client or for even your user. And that way, when you set up new clients and users in the future, you can go through and be sure that all your settings are going to be exactly how you set it. Unless you have that outlier client or an outlier user, for example, you don't have to go in on an individual basis for each client and each user and set up each and every setting under that system. You can go in and set up your user, set up your client exactly the way you had them set up for that template. We also created a script from commands. This can help save time also to creating scripts for common tasks. Because now instead of spending an hour running several commands on a machine, I can go ahead, right click and run a script on that machine and have the script run all those steps. The script is going to do it a lot faster than a human can, and a script is going to do it more accurately as well. And I say that because what if my process has 10 different steps, 20 different steps in there, and I forget to do step 6? I have the issue of human error being in there now. Step 6 doesn't get executed. The whole process fails, and I'm going back now, retracing all my steps, spending more time on this issue, whereas a script will run through each step, and if it does fail at one of the steps, I can get a ticket on it, I can get notified about it, and I'll figure out what happened. But this can also save me time because I know a script will not skip any steps and be able to give me quick results because it can execute all these commands a lot quicker than any human can. We set the extra data fields defaults, which defaults the settings for new clients in our systems. So if I create a client and I create a location, and I know that all my new locations for my new clients will get my default AV solution, I then have that script running to check to see, is that checkbox selected? Is it checked? Then that script will read that checkbox. It's selected. Great, go ahead and install the AV. If it's not selected, then it can take some other steps and go from there. Or it can check the current AV solution if it is installed. Is it there? Is it not installed? Is there a different program installed? So you can have your automation built into that script as well. Take it a little bit further and have it by setup, have that default set up so you can have something ready to go right out of the box when you have the agent installed on a new client. And then we have our automate agent configuration. And this is again installing applications during the onboarding of new clients. So this can also probably be used as an alternative to our set extra data fields defaults example, where I can have that default AV installed as part of my onboarding script, where I'm going to decide everybody's going to get that AV solution no matter what. I don't care if they don't want it. I don't care if they do. It's going to get installed on every system, then it's going to be kept up to date and so on. So I'm going to use that to install that application, or to my earlier example, if I don't want to be receiving phone calls or tickets on where's my Adobe Reader, how come that isn't installed, I can have Adobe Reader installed right out of the box for my agents, ready to go. So then I'm not receiving a whole bunch of tickets and spending a whole bunch of time installing Adobe Reader on all those machines. I have my onboarding script calling my initial software install partner script, and that is going to then call the Adobe Reader install script and install Adobe Reader on those systems. Okay, and with that, we have time for questions.
Okay, I have one question here, Natko. The question
Mhm.
is, if we have any script templates put together for a slow PC, I'm not aware of any that we have like that in our environment or available in the Solution Center. That might be something you might have success finding though in our virtual community or in other communities like MSP Geek. These are places where people have created stuff and shared what they've done for these solutions. So they might be able to share a script template for someone for something like that there. That's the only question I had at this point. Anybody
Okay.
else, please feel free to chime in with any additional questions right now, and we'll get those answered for you. Nako, if I could get you to back up to the agent configuration slide, where you're showing the initial software install partner script.
Yep, one sec. I think that is here.
Yeah,
I
this is
might
what
have
the
to.
script looks like out of the box. And Notco was talking to you guys about, let's say we want to make sure we've got Adobe Flash Player installed there, right? This is how the script ships out of the box. Notice the second line of the script is exit script. This is how it exists out of the box because it's not going to do anything. So if you want to start using this script, you're simply going to take the exit script step and move it below any of the other scripts you're calling, like the one that's highlighted to install Adobe Flash Player, or you can disable the exit script step or delete it. You don't really need an exit script step after your script is done doing all the stuff it's doing you want it to do. I just wanted to point it out to you guys because out of the box, it just exits here. So if you saw this presentation and you're like, I want to start doing this, how come it keeps exiting? Well, that's why. So if you're going to start using that one, just keep in mind.
All right, thank you, Scotty. Any other questions?
Okay, I have a couple here. How do I create a script for an application to run, such as Dell command update? About that question, when you're saying create a script for an application to run, do you mean to install Dell command update? Is that what you're looking for?
Or are we looking to launch that application or have that run in the background?
Someone else is actually chiming in on that question, saying, I think you can run Dell CU with switches or drivers, etc., to update. And then the person who asked the question did chime in, to run and install the drivers Dell command update is requesting.
Okay, so I would think that if we're doing that through the commands process we showed earlier and they get listed as commands from that automation screen, then we could probably do again that right click and create the script from those commands. We can select those commands out of there and see what that brings up on the auto created script editor window when it opens. And that should execute those commands as it sees it from the automate agent. If you're not doing that, or if you're executing anything manually on that system, then that might need a little bit further investigation.
Yeah, the other person who chimed in on that saying, I think you can run Dell command with switches for drivers, et cetera, to update. So that sounds like if you would just put that in a command line in a script, make sure Dell command is present on the device where you need it, and then you can run it at a command line with switches to install the drivers. It sounds like that's how you would accomplish that. It's simple, make sure the Dell command is there and run a shell command on there to shell command with Dell command with the appropriate switches to update the drivers. We had
Now,
another question
question.
here. I'm sorry, go ahead,
Oh,
Nako.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Scotty, if they know how to do this in something like PowerShell, then they could actually have a script that could just call and run their PowerShell command, could it not?
Absolutely. That if you know
Okay.
how to do it with PowerShell, that's the quickest and easiest way. You're going to use our execute script function, choose PowerShell. You can paste your existing PowerShell right in there and it'll run it for you.
All right.
We had another question about, does the client permissions will work in the web client? I'm not exactly sure what we mean by that. Any of the permissions that you copied using the copy permissions function that Nacho was showing will also carry over to your web client permissions. If you want to shed some more light on that, you can. You cannot do the copy permissions functions he was showing from the web client. You can only execute them from the desktop client.
Correct. So the permissions that I set for my clients as far as my user classes go and what they can do, those permissions do carry over to the web client and they do apply. But if you're expecting to be able to do the same thing where you right click on a client and you set those permissions and then copy those permissions to other clients, you cannot do that in the web.
All right, we have another question here. Can you set up default printer per location in a client during the onboarding script? Question there is, how would you set up default printer per client, or per location in the client? How would you normally set up a default printer, right? Obviously, you can do it in Windows. Can you do it with a PowerShell script? Can you do it with a command line? So if you can do it in Windows with something like that, a PowerShell script or a command line, then certainly you could put that in a script and you could absolutely add it to the initial, that would probably be initial system configuration partner.
Yep, that would
So
be step 4 here.
yeah, so it's definitely,
Uh,
if you can do it from something like a command shell or a PowerShell script, then you would write a script to do that, and then you would have this onboarding script that Notco is looking at call it for you.
so I'll take a quick peek real quick here. Since I've got Automate open. Of course, now everyone's watching, so it's going to take its time.
Right.
Okay, and we are going to go to our system automation and then go to our onboarding and initial system configuration partner. We'll open that guy up. I go drag the window down. There we go. And we have a blank slate here. But as Scotty had mentioned, that if you want to do something like that, you can come in here, we can add a step, and we can choose to, I would probably say it could be done via command line, for example. Do you have the function off the top of your head for that, Scotty? If I wanted to run something command line, is it just shell?
Shell, correct. Shell,
Okay.
shell as admin, shell as user, shell is just good enough.
Yep. So we could do shell and the other ones that Scotty mentioned, shell as admin, shell as user, and then you can put your command in there that you would have in your command line to establish that printer. And you can go ahead and add that step in there. I would save it, hit save down there on the script. And then this can be a simple one-step script. Just if you want it for that purpose of installing a printer, then go right ahead, put that one step in there. And when the onboarding script runs for that client, it's going to go ahead and call up that script and run that step and then continue on once it's finished. Okay, any other questions?
I have not had any additional ones since, other than those we've covered so far, Notco. Well, here you go. Can you add a user to a local admin group? Well, I certainly know you can do that from a command line. So
Yes,
yes, I mean, just like
that would
Notco was
be,
showing in the script, if you did a shell command, you can absolutely do that.
yeah, it would be the same process. You could do it shell. If you can do it PowerShell, you can do that through, call up that in the script as well and set that up. So, all right, if we don't have any additional questions coming in, I just want to mention that we can take questions after we sign off at education@connectwise.com. So if you're watching this now and you're thinking, man, I had this great question, this would have been awesome, but I didn't get a chance to ask it in time, that's perfectly okay. Education@connectwise.com does come to all of our Automate SMEs, so myself, Scotty, and our other Autobro DBB. We can see that question and get an answer for you as quickly as possible. So keep in mind that this session is also recorded as well. So if you do want to share this with any of your other colleagues, it will be in our video library once the video is published. All right, and with that, do we still have any more questions, or is that it, Scotty?
I think we are all set.
All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and sign off. Everyone have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.